swiftness. He struck and struck and struck again. All the stab wounds were to the stomach. King David screamed from the pain, and the more he twisted away, the more the boy stalked him. He screamed from sheer pain now, and as he fell, Mike bent down and plunged the knife into his prone figure. Blood ran over Mike's hands, and his clothes were covered in it. He struck King David one more time, high in the chest. Salutations, and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks. My name is Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. On this edition of Ralph Reads, I would like to bring forth another miniseries inspired by the writings of the one, the only, DonaldGoines. This time around, I introduce you to Never Die Alone. All aboard, ladies and gentlemen, and let the reading commence. Chapter 1. Paul Pulowski glanced around his dingy one-room flat and grinned. Well, old boy, he reflected with a cold, bitter humor, you've seen better times than this. Not that being stuck in the Upper West Side of New York City was too bad, just a damn nightmare. It was a cold water flat with a small single bed occupying most of the room. An old beat-up dresser leaned on 3 legs against one wall, the 4th leg being an old telephone directory that someone had put underneath ages ago. The pages of the book had turned yellow from age, but at least it held the drawer firm. Paul tossed his legs over the iron-framed bed and got up slowly. Raising his arms over his head, he stretched his 6'2" frame, then ran his hands through his curly black hair. He stumbled over toward the sink and turned on the water. There was no hot and cold faucet, only one faucet, and only cold water came out of it. He made a face before shoving both hands under the water and tossing the chilly water back onto himself. The shock of the water completely awakened him. Now maybe I can act like a man, Paul said loudly, having long ago fallen into the habit of talking to himself. Removing an old comb with 6 of the teeth missing, Paul used it to fix his hair so that it wouldn't look as if he had just gotten out of bed. He then went to work on his teeth, brushing them with an old yellow toothbrush that had seen better days. Satisfied with his morning toilet, Paul removed a clean white shirt from the dresser and laid it out on the bed. Pulling back the mattress, he removed a pair of black pants that he had placed there the night before. It was the system he used to press his pants, wrapping the legs in newspapers, then placing them under the mattress. It was a cheap way to take the wrinkles out. After checking the pants to make sure they were wrinkle-free, Paul removed some clean socks from the dresser and placed them next to the other clothes on the bed. His shorts were hanging on a hanger over the sink. He removed the freshly washed underwear from the hanger, and then he placed them on the bed. Paul checked his watch to make sure he wasn't running late for his appointment. It was just 11:30. He still had an hour and a half to kill. He debated on whether or not he should take a bath, but since the bathtub was down the hall next to the second-floor toilet, he decided against taking one. One of these days, he promised himself, I'm going to have me an apartment with a bath and private toilet right here for my personal use. Just to kill more of the extra time he had on his hands, Paul began to wash up in the sink, making sure he scrubbed thoroughly under his arms. When he finished, he reached for a can of deodorant on the wooden shelf over the sink. He cursed loudly as he shook the can and found it empty. Next time I sell another short story, I'm going to buy me at least 2 fucking cans of this shit, he promised himself. But then he remembered that he was going on an interview for a job, and that he might not have to wait for his next royalty check from his publishers for his 2 paperback books. A writer's life was pure hell, he reflected. Sometimes he had a few extra dollars in March or September when his royalty checks arrived, but the other months were hell unless the writer happened to be a good money manager. But to find a writer who could manage money was rare, because anyone who was adept at it would have enough common sense to pick a better livelihood. As Paul began to dress with care, he glanced in the tiny mirror over the dresser. Shaggy brows and bright, friendly blue eyes glared back at him. He ran his hand over the well-trimmed Van Dyke beard as he gravely scrutinized the large Jewish nose that revealed his true heritage. Even though Paul was Polish, his mother had been Jewish, something he was deeply proud of. Even as he glanced in the mirror, old memories that he tried to keep buried began to awaken. The day in Germany, when his father had welcomed his mother's parents to their house. He had made him move across the street to his uncle's home under the pretext that his grandparents needed his room. At the time, Paul didn't understand it, being just 12 years old, but he felt something was wrong. In the past, whenever his grandparents came to visit, they had always stayed in the guest room, never needing Paul's bedroom. But on this occasion, Paul was told to move and not to come across the street until one of his parents came over after him. 1938. The year that Paul saw the German soldiers come and put the yellow Star of David on the front door. It wasn't until much later that Paul realized that his father could have escaped the madness that came their way, but he had stayed right beside his wife. Paul never found out what really happened to his parents and grandparents, but he liked to believe that his father was allowed to stay beside the woman he loved until the very last moment. It was a romantic thought, but one that he cherished deeply. The day after the truck came and took his parents and grandparents, Paul's uncle made the necessary arrangements, and before Paul knew what was happening, he found himself in Paris until he was 18. Paul spent his years in boarding schools. His uncle had died before the end of the war, so Paul was left on his own rather early in life. The little bit of money that came out of Germany to him was spent on his education. Before his college days were over, Paul had to find a job to help finish his education. "Now," he said grimly into the mirror, "you Jewish Polak bastard, let's get on uptown and overwhelm these cocksuckers with your grand nobility." Paul slipped on his suit coat, took one more glance into the mirror, then brushed off some imaginary dust from the lapel of the dark sport coat. He adjusted the black tie he had put on for the occasion and made ready to depart. One quick glance down at his shoes made him hesitate. He took a quick look at his watch, then hurried over to the dresser and searched around under the shirts and shorts until he found an old t-shirt. He examined the shirt carefully before deciding to use it to wipe off his shoes. He took out some polish and quickly applied some to the toe of each shoe. Using an old brush he got out of the top drawer, he brushed the shoes carefully. When he finished, the shoes shined expertly. It was always this way when he worked, never wasting a moment and not spending much time. Spring was in the air. Paul could smell it as he raised his head like a hound dog on the hunt. Even here in New York, a man could smell the freshness of spring. Some of the gutters still held dirty water from the ice that had melted long ago. The water didn't have anywhere to drain off to because the drains were still plugged from the trash of last fall. It was only down in the ghetto that a person encountered such neglect. Here on 87th Street between Broadway and Amsterdam, the blacks, poor whites, and Hispanics were trapped in their own private prison. Some would never rise up out of the poverty that surrounded them. The lucky ones would eventually earn enough money from selling drugs or have the money their women would earn to leave. Yet most of them wouldn't move because they were frightened of the outside world. This was the only world they knew, the slums with the hustlers and bums falling over each other. So they would live and die in their ghetto, afraid of the outside. Paul waved to the elderly black man who sold newspapers on the corner. The man waved back as Paul went by. Peddlers moved up and down the street, calling out at customers and friends alike so that there was a constant cacophony of voices. A visitor touring through these parts would many times be lost and frightened by the strange sounds coming up from the bowels of the city. Paul reached the subway and ran down the steps quickly, taking two at a time. A train had come in, but there was no hurry. Another one would come roaring through in less than 5 minutes. After paying his fare, Paul hurried on, reaching the train before the doors closed. He jumped into the second car right before the doors began to close. It took less than 10 minutes before Paul was downtown. He made his way out of the subterranean station and found 54th Street. Removing a small piece of paper from his pocket, he studied the address carefully, then folded the paper neatly and put it in his pocket. The sidewalks were crowded with people. Again, Paul wondered idly just where all these people could be going. Every time he came downtown, he was overwhelmed by the crowds. Even at night, the streets and sidewalks were jammed with people, most of them seeming to be in a hurry to get wherever it was they were going. Paul almost passed by the building he was searching for. He stepped back a few paces, then entered the dingy-looking building. He stepped in the lobby and examined the directory on the far wall. He ran his fingers down the names of the occupants until he found what he was looking for. The Evening Star was at the bottom of the list. The large lobby led to 3 elevators. Paul took the first one and punched the button for the 4th floor. He wondered if the rest of the elevators were as dilapidated as the one he was using. The elevator moved slowly upward, cranking loudly. Paul raised his eyes toward heaven as if in prayer, then noticed the escape door in the ceiling. He speculated on how an elderly person would go about getting out in an emergency. He would be hard-pressed himself to reach the escape door. Even with his height, he'd have to jump and pull himself upward with just his arms, something that many men in their prime couldn't do, let alone an old man or woman. For the first time since applying for the job, Paul wondered if it would even come close to his expectations. The sight of the building killed some of the joy he'd had. His asking price dropped lower before he even got off the elevator. But he reminded himself, the man he had talked to over the phone, Mr. Billings, had made it sound interesting. Mr. Billings had read Paul's 2 novels and believed he was just the man they were looking for to write a byline in the weekly newspaper. Paul wished he had done his homework better. Instead of buying a newspaper and seeing what kind of copy the Evening Star put out, he'd given up after trying to find the paper at only 2 newsstands. He'd postponed getting one because he would have had to go uptown. Now, he regretted his laziness. Mr. Billings had mentioned that the paper did lean slightly toward the left, but what the hell did that mean? Right or left? What damn difference did it make? The elevator door opened slowly, and Paul stepped forward to see what his future held. Chapter 2. King David, better known as King Cobra when he wasn't around, took one more glance at the street map of New York City and tossed it into the glove compartment. He started the engine of the Cadillac and pulled out into the traffic. It had been 5 years since he'd left New York City, but now he was returning, and in all his glory. The dark green mohair suit fitted King David well. He was a small-built man, and thus wore his clothes well. Even with his high-heeled black Oxfords, his height barely reached 5'9". King David began to feel that warm, good feeling as he neared the city. When he had left, he was only a black man running with just the clothes on his back. He'd managed to cheat certain people out of nice sums of money to help him travel, and that was the first thing he had taken care of, he reflected, as he reached over and pushed his cigarette lighter in. He would have to make sure he paid off his debts so that there wouldn't be any trouble. For a brief moment, the bushy eyebrows came together as he frowned. The sharp, bird-like eyes set deep in the dark brown face grew large with fear as he remembered that Moon, the neighborhood dope man, was one of the people he had ripped off for a nice piece of money. King David didn't need to be told that he had left behind an enemy that would never forget. But King David believed the man was greedy enough to be bought off. With the $50,000 he had stashed away in the trunk of the car, he was sure he could satisfy Moon. A small piece of that stash would do the trick, he thought coldly. He had only beat Moon for $500, so $1,000 would clear the air between them. Neither man really wanted any trouble, King David kept telling himself. Moon couldn't stand it, not in his business anyway. Their way of life depended on them staying out of the man's sight, so quite naturally, he believed Moon would jump at the chance to gain back twice as much money as he had lost. Whether or not he would make good the money he took from the women who had believed in him was another matter altogether. He couldn't see how any of them could bring him trouble that he couldn't handle, so he might just save money there. After all, this wasn't Christmas, and he damn sure wasn't Santa Claus. King David pulled up at the end of the line behind the rest of the cars waiting to cross the Brooklyn Bridge. He waited patiently until it was his turn to pay his toll. As he drove away from the toll station, he knew that the only thing ahead of him now was that bridge that led him into New York City. "You're just about home, baby!" he sang out loud as he pushed the gas pedal down to the floor, causing the Cadillac to leap forward. Within an hour, King David was pulling up in front of the Blue Room Bar on Broadway. He stood in the lobby until his eyes became adjusted to the dark. Then he made his way over to the bar.
"Well, look at what the dogs have dug up!"
Jasper Williams yelled from behind her bar. She was a tall, light-skinned dyke who could dress up and look damn good whenever she wanted to, but most of the time she preferred to dress like a man.
"Honey,"
she said as King David came up to the bar,
"I heard you had went down to the Bigfoot country and decided to stay there for your health. Now, with spring coming, here you are. It sure means we gonna have one hot-ass summer around here."
"Hi, Jasper," King David said as he slid onto a bar stool. "Things can't be that bad. I thought folks would miss me around here." Jasper glanced closely at him to see if he was serious, then laughed loudly like a man.
"Nigga, you must be insane. Ain't nobody ever missed a rattlesnake if it wasn't in their bed when they got ready to go to sleep. So how in the hell could they possibly miss you?"
"Oh, baby, you ain't got to be that cold, have you?" King David inquired in the little boy's voice that he used for con action. The tall woman looked down her nose at him.
"Nigga, don't come down on me with that weak-ass shit of yours. I know all the people who were looking for you when you split, and as of now, I believe some of them will be damn glad to hear about you showing back up."
For a second, a chill flashed through King David, but he quickly shook it off. If he handled everything like he had planned, it would work out. "Tell me something, Jasper. Is Moon still around?"
"Uh-huh. And I'll bet he'd be willing to pay a nice sum just to know how you're doing. In fact,"
Jasper continued,
"I'll bet he's one of the most interested people in your health and whereabouts."
David shook off the feeling of dread. "So how can I get in touch with him? I got some bread for him." Jasper grinned.
"Now how about that? I would have never had believed a good con man like you would be trying to pay back some of the people you ripped off."
"I'm not interested in what you think or believe, Jasper. If you want to make this $50 bill, you'll figure out some way to get him on the phone so that I could rap with him." The woman stared down at the money for a minute, then snatched it up. She walked down to the end of the bar and removed the telephone. As King David watched her in silence, he sipped the drink she had left him. He hadn't bothered to order. She remembered that he only drank gin and squirt. Jasper glanced up as she began to talk into the receiver.
Hello, Moon. This is Jasper over at the Blue Room. Yeah, I think I got somebody here you might be interested in talking to.
The man on the other end of the line spoke sharply into the telephone. Jasper decided to make the call fast because she didn't want to get involved any further.
Man, I didn't mean to disturb you, but I thought you'd like to know that King Cobra is here. Yeah, you know who I mean. King David. He wants to say a few words to you.
The other end of the line went silent for a minute. She thought Moon had hung up. Then the man's voice came over sharp and clear. Put the nigga on. I got a few things to say to him. Jasper waved for King David to come down and pick up the phone. As far as she was concerned, she had made a fast $50. King David took his time as he walked down to the phone. Things weren't working out as he had planned. He wasn't making the big splash he had intended to make, and it was all because of the smart-ass bitch behind the bar. He wanted her to see that he wasn't in any hurry. Jasper watched him come down the bar, trying to walk so coolly. The bastard won't be so jazzy when Moon and his boys finish with his ass, she thought. Still taking his time, King David picked up the phone. What's happening, baby? He asked. Long time since I talked to you. You're damn right it's been a long time, Moon answered sharply. I don't know what brings you back to the city, but I guess you must have my fucking money. Yeah, baby, I got your paper, so don't get in any uproar. Everything is going to be all right. Moon hesitated for a moment. I hope you realize that since it's been this long, there's some interest on that motherfucking money. This was what David had been waiting for. Aw, man, I ain't rich, baby, but I can dig where you're coming from. How much extra money am I supposed to come up with? While David had been talking, Moon had been trying to remember how much money the punk owed him. Yeah, King Cobra, I know you ain't rich, but I also know you must have my paper or you wouldn't be talking to me. Moon snapped his fingers, then said, You hold on a minute, David. I want to check my books. I got you wrote down somewhere. Without waiting for a reply, Moon lays down the receiver and walked into his bedroom. He sat on the edge of the king-size bed and opened up the drawer. The small nightstand beside the bed had its twin on the other side. Each nightstand had a statue of a black woman rising from the base, leading up to the top of the lamp. Heavy black drapes covered the windows so that there would be no chance of anyone seeing in from the outside. Moon flipped through the pages of his record book quickly, using the index. Not finding what he wanted under the name David, he then looked under the letter S for snakes. Not finding it there, he sat back and rubbed his double chin. Moon was a heavy-set black man who had once been powerfully built. The muscles had turned to fat from easy living. His eyes were almost covered by the layers of fat that rolled over his body. A heavy, black, bushy beard with sideburns that met his whiskers encircled large and extremely red lips. He wore a natural that was thinning rapidly with age. But everything about the man was overpowered by the little pig eyes that stared out from his massive face. The evil that he possessed was revealed by those eyes. Nothing but heavy black shades could camouflage that look in his eyes. Again, Moon snapped his fingers, then looked under C for Cobra. He ran his fingers down the few names, and a slight smile broke through his heavily bearded lips as he found what he was looking for. Yeah, my man, Moon said, picking up the receiver. From my books, it's like you owe me 600 big ones from the bell. He fell silent, waiting to see if King David would say anything about the extra 100 he had tacked on. Damn, David cursed. From my books, it ain't but $500, my man. Yeah, well, that's not the problem anyway, Moon stated coldly. We ain't took into consideration the interest on the 600. You know what I mean? This time, Moon didn't wait for David's answer. Now over 5 years have passed, and that's a lot of interest. Okay, Moon, I didn't call you to argue. I just want to straighten up the books with you so that I won't have any problems, you dig? Yeah, I dig right where you're coming from, Moon replied. So let's do it like this, Dave. You give my boys $1,000 when they show up. I figured that should cover whatever trouble I've gone through trying to locate you so that I could get my money or some of your ass. For a minute, King David's temper got the best of him, but he controlled it enough so that the man on the other end of the phone didn't realize it. It was just what he had figured Moon would ask for, so there was no problem. Anyway, it was worth the money to pay up so he wouldn't have to be in any more trouble. Okay, Moon, I'll pay it. I just want you to call off your dogs. Is that a deal? Yeah, baby. If something happens to you, it won't be because you owe me any money. That's just mellow, Moon, David replied. Then he couldn't help but brag a little. Have your boys meet me at the Blue Room. My new caddy is parked across the street, so more than likely I'll be sitting in it, watching the traffic going and coming. Moon laughed. You ain't got to worry, King. Anytime a man calls and offers me $1,000, he gets the best treatment of the house. He laughed again and hung up, not waiting for David's reply. Moon walked out of his bedroom and into the living room. He looked at the young men lounging around in the plush room. A couple were bodyguards. The others were his closest pushers, the only men that Moon sold dope to. Moon pointed the small book at the young black across the room. Mike, I think a friend of yours has come back to town. The well-dressed young man in his early 20s raised a glass of Scotch whiskey in his hand and downed it. From the phone call, I could figure it out a little, Mike said, setting the empty glass on the bar behind him. Wall-to-wall carpeting, a gold couch, and a marble coffee table with matching end tables spelled only a portion of Moon's success. Tell me, Mike, Moon said, lowering himself onto his favorite gold love seat. I sort of forget what it was he did to you. It might not be important enough for you to go to the trouble you're going to have to go through to play payback. Ain't no amount of trouble enough to stop me from killing that motherfucker, Mike said bitterly. Moon watched the young man closely. He knew it wasn't any idle threat. Mike was young, but he was dangerous. He was a professional killer with just his hands. A black belt in karate gave a man that power, but more than likely, killing King David would force him to use someone else. Well, I guess you know, I gave him my word that I wouldn't be involved in any trouble coming his way, though I hadn't forgotten the embarrassment that came my way after the word got out that punk had played on me and got away. Mike got up and went around the bar so that he could fix himself another drink. He waited until he was finished before speaking. Leaning on the bar, he glanced around at his friends. Killing a man was something you didn't do lightly, and the fewer people who knew about it, the better off the killer was. The other men in the room stared back at the tall Negro. If you think you're going to need any help, Mike, you can count on me. Mike stared at the jet black man. He was so dark, he had gained the nickname Blue in his younger days. He was slender and supple, all bone and muscle, with a brutal leanness about his face. His skin was so dark, it had a shine about it, matching the startling black eyes that had the look of the hunter. There was no humor in them. Mike glanced at his best friend. I was counting on you, Blue, but I'm glad you offered your help so I didn't have to ask for it. Good. Good, Moon said. Now maybe we can hear what it's all about. It was obvious that Mike didn't want to repeat the tale, but his boss wasn't leaving him any choice. Moon's word was law. Either you did what he said or found somewhere else to work if you were lucky enough to get away with a whole skin. There was anguish in the young man's voice as he began to speak. I was 15 when it happened, man. I thought I was a man. But King Cobra proved to me that I was just a young punk. Visualizing the scene again, Mike's face tightened up in anger. My mother had just got her county check, and there was about 8 of us in the house to feed. Well, King David waited until the insurance man came by and cashed the check, and then he took it from her. Every motherfucking penny. He tossed her $10 out of a $300 check. I guess he meant for us to try and live on that. Anyway, I charged at the bastard, but I didn't have anything in my hand. At the same time, he had been sipping on a Coke, keeping the bottle for protection in case anything went wrong. Mike paused and shifted nervously. My mother reached for the nigger before I did, but he fired a straight right to her head, and it took her out of the picture. Next in line was me. He used a Coke bottle. Mike opened his mouth, revealing the gap where his 2 front teeth were missing. This is what I got out of my funky attempt to help my mama. But I ain't never forgot. The story had been short and to the point. Now the other 2 gunmen in the room shifted around nervously. It was one thing to be all right with a guy, and quite another to swear to help him kill a nigger when nothing was to be gained. They can understand Mike's anger, but they were too callous to be really moved, all except Blue, that is. The spectacle of wiping out a punk fascinated him. In reality, he enjoyed killing. It was only then that he really felt alive. "We don't need these motherfuckers' help, Mike," Blue stated in a chilling voice. There was no doubt in anyone's mind whether or not he meant it. His eyes glittered dangerously. The other men were too aware of Blue. They could tell when he was aroused. The killer was beginning to breathe heavily. Finally, Moon made his decision. "Now, Mike, behind me giving my word, this is how it's going to have to be done. Rocky and Alvin will go and pick up my grand. Then you and Blue can move in and do your thing." Moon stopped and pointed his finger as if it were a gun. "I mean it, boys. Don't do nothing to blow my grand. After that, I could give a fuck." Rocky grinned at Mike. "When do we get started?" "Right now," Moon said as his 2 gunmen stood up. "Ain't no reason why we shouldn't let that money sit by when all you have to do is pick it up. So get started." He'll be sitting in his new Cadillac across the street from the Blue Room. As the 2 well-dressed men started for the door, Mike walked over and picked up the phone. He made his call quickly. "Sis," he said sharply, "I want you to be downstairs waiting for me. It's important. Oh yeah, baby. Be sure to put on your shortest mini. We need you to catch the attention of someone." Before the woman could reply, Mike hung up the phone. Moon grinned at him. "She's kinda young to be using on a job like this, ain't she? She wasn't too young to see her mother get the shit kicked out of her on more than one fucking occasion either," Mike replied sharply. "Okay," Moon said quietly. "You guys are on your own. If something funky goes down, don't involve me. I don't want no parts of it, you dig?" Neither man answered as they walked swiftly towards the door. It was a little too late for words now. Action was the only thing left. Chapter 3. The elevator stopped on the 4th floor, and Paul Pawlowski stepped out into the dimly lit hallway. He didn't have any trouble finding his way to the newspaper office. They occupied the entire floor. Taking a chance, Paul opened the first door he came to. The receptionist glanced up from her desk as Paul walked toward her. He tried to smile, but could feel it frozen on his face.
"Yes, could I help you?"
she inquired in a voice that sounded better than she looked. She was small, with tiny breasts revealed by a see-through blouse. Her face was made up heavily, with her hair dyed a bright blonde. Paul wondered idly if she could be real. He couldn't see her legs, but he would have bet money that they were small. Everything about her represented a woman on the make. As he stood in front of her, she allowed her eyes to run up and down his body. For a second, he felt like a prize bull about to be sold. He cleared his throat. "I am supposed to have an appointment with Mr. Billings, miss."
Miss Laverne Harding, dear. But you can call me Laverne if you care to.
"Okay, Laverne. But now, how about Mr. Billings? I'm supposed to have a 1 o'clock appointment with him." Paul stated a little more coldly than he meant to, but the woman was coming on just too strong, something he couldn't stand in his women. He liked to be the one who did the chasing, not the other way around. The woman pouted her lips, then picked up the phone and called Mr. Billings.
"Okay, honey. He will see you now. There's the first office on your right."
It wasn't hard to find. The offices were nothing but rooms partitioned off with the cheapest of plywood. Paul hesitated in front of the office he took to be Mr. Billings, then raised his hand and knocked softly. "Come on in! Come on in!" The voice from inside the office roared out good-naturedly. Paul pushed the door open and stepped in. The first thing he noticed was a huge fat man sitting behind an old beat-up desk. The man had thinning gray hair with blonde eyebrows. His lips were twisted in a cruel sneer that seemed to be a part of him, no matter how good-natured he acted. Across his upper lip was one of the largest handlebar mustaches Paul had ever seen. Can this crap be for real? Paul wondered as he stared around. The rest of the office was bare, except for 2 beaten-up chairs that sat in the front of the desk. It didn't look as if the company was too profitable. The big man stood up and stretched out his hand. "How do you do, Mr. Pawlowski? I've been waiting for you." Paul nodded his head. Interviews always made him nervous. "About the editing job, Mr. Billings, am I right when I say you mentioned something about a byline?" Yes, indeed. A byline goes along with it. I hope you don't mind me calling you Paul. It breaks the ice a little if we're on a first-name basis. And you can call me John." Paul cleared his throat and waited for John to let him in on what he was supposed to do. John?" The first name gave him a little trouble, but he managed to get it out. "What kind of byline am I supposed to write?" John beamed down on him before returning to his seat. "You're a man after my own heart, Paul. Yes, sir, indeed. You like to come right to the point, as I can see." Paul waited, wondering when the man was going to get to the point. There was something wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "Now, Paul, there's one thing you should know. Most of our papers sell in the South. It's our biggest outlet, so we have to sort of slant our work towards the Southern white. You know what I mean?" Billings let out a big laugh, and Paul knew if he had been standing next to the man, the fat bastard would have probably slapped him on his back. "No, I don't think I quite know what you mean, Mr. Billings. When you say slant our work towards the Southern white, I'm at a slight loss understanding just what you mean." "It's not hard," Billings answered, smiling broadly. "I'd read your last novel. And that part you had in there about that big black buck raping 3 white women before he was caught, that's the stuff I'm talking about. My Southern readers will eat that shit up." Paul was too dumbfounded to answer. He just stared at the fat man. Billings took his silence to mean he went along with the idea. "Now, if you could lay that kind of crap on thick enough, hell, we'll sell every copy." The surprise left Paul. Now he was only numb. That happened to be a novel, not a news story. It was fiction, not real life. I used a black character because the book called for one. It made it more real. I didn't do it to make people in the South happy. I just wrote a novel, and it didn't sell that damn well. Now, Billings said lightly, the work I have for you won't have to be fiction. There's enough rape going on in Harlem so that you don't have to make up a fucking thing, Paul. All you have to do is spread the truth a little, dig the dirt up. That's what sells. Paul, there's money in this kind of crap. I wouldn't shit you about it. In less than a month, you'll be living like a king. All you have to do is dig. Billings was so involved in what he was saying that he didn't pay any attention to Paul's face. It was becoming red as a beet. Now, Paul, there's one more thing that will sell like hell down south. Toss a little crap in that byline about Jews, you know. The Jews up this way are constantly causing the niggas to try and be more than they are. We build on these two concepts, and I promise you, buddy, you'll get a raise before you know it. Don't call me buddy, Paul stated, trying to control his anger. His fists were clenched so tightly, the knuckles were white. Oh, I guess you want something like what Hitler did. A lot of raving of how dirty the Jews are and that kind of shit. Billings broke out smiling. That's it. We read about parties the Jews went to with the jigs, having their women dancing with the black bastards and all of that shit. I'll tell you, boy, it will really sell. I know what I'm talking about. I've been in this business for years. Oh, I guess the only reason why your fucking paper sells only in the South, it's pure dirt, Billings. For the first time, Billings stopped talking and glanced up from his desk. He didn't like the look on the young man's face. If he could read minds, he wouldn't have liked the thoughts going through the young man's mind at all. Paul was seeing Germany all over again, seeing the men with the black shirts yelling at the crowds about the dirty Jews. Rabble-rousers from the word go, but their shouting and screaming finally paid off. People had listened, then turned their heads when the killings began. It was this kind of man who was responsible for his mother and father being dead. Men who didn't care who was hurt, just as long as they made their blood money for the lies they told. Billings read something threatening in Paul's face. If you don't like to write about the Jews, that's okay, he added quickly. I've got another man on the staff who can handle that part of it. All you'll have to do is dig up crap about the jigs. We can sell anything you write as long as you make it strong enough. Paul stood up and leaned over the desk, bracing himself on the palms of his hands. First of all, Billings, there's something I think you should know. I'm Jewish myself. Don't let the Polish name fool you. My mother was all Jewish, and I'm damn proud of it. I'm damn proud of being of that race. Secondly, I feel very sorry for blacks. I live in a building with some of the tenants being black, so I know what kind of hell they catch without a bastard coming along trying to make some money off of lies printed about them. Third, I think the South has enough problems without me writing something that would inflame some ignorant bastard so that he got drunk and took out his anger on some poor black bastard who doesn't have the slightest idea of why it's happening to him. Next to last, this is what I think about you and your idea. With that, Paul leaned over and spit in the man's face. Now you can do any goddamn thing you think you're big enough to do if you don't like what I just did. Before Billings could answer, Paul spun around on his heel and walked out the door. He was so mad that he ignored the woman as she smiled brightly at him. His face was red as a beet. He fumbled with the elevator, impatiently pushing the button until the car finally arrived. He shoved his way into the empty elevator and rode down to the lobby. His rage was still growing as he came out onto the street. He walked blindly until he found a bar that had a 3-for-1 sign-up. He went in and began to get fairly drunk, not bothering to worry about the grocery money he was drinking up. I wish I could have kicked the bastard in his fat ass, Paul murmured angrily. What did you say, Mac? Another customer asked from the stool next to him. Nothing, Paul replied harshly, the tone of his voice revealing that he was in the wrong mood to be tampered with. The man on the next stool was too wise to follow it up. He had been drinking in bars in New York for some time, so he knew when to leave well enough alone. The shadows began to get large outside, but Paul didn't notice. He continued to drink, trying to figure out what kind of fucking world it was that he lived in. A bastard like Billings would go home to his fat wife and big house with the green grass in front of it, while Paul would end up climbing the stairs to his second-floor flat with the cold water. But at least he was a man with some kind of scruples. If he had to live in a cold water flat the rest of his days, he'd do it before he sold his manhood. And that's just what a job with Billings paper would be, selling out his manhood for a soft job. Better to starve than live off the misfortune of others. It was dark when Paul staggered from the bar. He had spent his food money and had to leave, but it had been enough to get him totally smashed. He didn't go in for heavy drinking too often, but when he did, he went to the limit. As Paul staggered down the street, he had to ask directions to the subway. Many of the people he approached hurried and got out of his way, not bothering to try to hear what he was saying. To them, he was just another ghetto drunk, possibly dangerous if they didn't watch their step around him. Nobody knew what a drunkard might do, and they weren't taking any chances. Finally, Paul got a young boy to point out the way to the nearest subway. It was in the next block. Paul made his way to it and went down the steps. Since he was still uptown, he didn't have to worry too much about the gangs of tough youths that roamed the streets searching for drunks. But when he reached his neighborhood, his danger would increase unless he straightened up. The night air did him good. Even though it was spring, the evening breeze was rather chilly. The cool air sobered him up enough so that when he got off the subway, he could walk without staggering all over the street. When he reached the street and started up it, he saw some men arguing with each other. Then he heard a man scream. The scream was repeated over and over. Paul started running toward them. "What the hell is going on there?" he hollered as he neared the struggling threesome. At the sight of Paul, two of the men broke away and ran toward a car parked across the street. Paul noticed from the light of the street lamp that a young girl sat behind the steering wheel. As soon as the men entered the car, it sped rapidly away. As Paul neared the man they had been struggling with, the man crumpled up and fell to the pavement. Chapter 4. After hanging up the telephone, King David walked back down the length of the bar and ordered another drink from Jasper.
"You don't look too happy there, King,"
Jasper stated as she set the drink in front of him. King David glanced at her coldly. "You need something to do, bitch. Then you might worry about your own business. I don't need no help in taking care of mine." He stopped and gestured along the bar. "Give everybody on the bar what they want. Since you ain't got no help back there, it will keep you out of my face for a while." She glanced down the bar, already aware that it was semi-full.
"You black bastard,"
she said loud enough for the nearest customers to hear. The tone of voice she used angered him. "Simple ass bitch. Do your fucking job and give everybody a motherfucking drink," King David roared. The whole bar heard him. When she hesitated and put her hands on her hips, two young dappers yelled from the middle of the bar, "Quit bullshitting, woman, and take care of this white man's bar. If he was here, you'd be running up and down like a track star." Jasper opened her mouth but quickly closed it, making her look like a fish out of water. Her yellow cheeks became red and common sense prevailed. Jasper had worked the bar too long. She spent too many years working around blacks. Black men were quick to kill, and sometimes their moods were already down on them before they ever reached the bar. So she turned on the charm instead of the anger. She flashed her teeth and hustled down to the young men.
"What's wrong with you niggas tonight? Can't pick up no bitches?"
Both of the young boys smiled at her. Since she was waiting on them first, they didn't have to worry about the stud at the end of the bar changing his mind. "Hey, baby, we just ain't got all night to wait on the drink. One of our ladies might be down and we'd have to leave right away." "Yeah, baby," the other brother said after his friend stopped. "It ain't that we're hustling drinks either. It's just that we like to drink along with any hip brothers who's handling big enough to run 'em up and down the bar."
"Okay, baby,"
Jasper answered.
"And I know both of y'all are big spenders, too. Now what would you like? Another beer like what you got or something more expensive?"
The smaller of the two partners frowned, causing a thin razor scar on the side of his dark brown cheek to look like a straight line. He knew she had put them down, but it had been done lightly. They lived in the neighborhood and came to the bar every day, sometimes in the mornings, sitting around joking with the white owner who worked the day shift. They accepted Jasper's tongue because she always steered them to drunken tricks that had found their way to the bar for the first time. Whenever they pulled a rip-off, she would be waiting with her hand out, and they always argued about the money. "Nah, baby," the light brown-skinned brother said. "Give us some Scotch whiskey. Double, over the rocks." He made a fist of black power and raised his hand in the air toward King David. The king raised his glass in reply. He knew as well as the boy who did it that it meant nothing. The boy was wondering how hard it would be to take King David's bankroll, and as Jasper leaned over and poured the drinks, he put his thoughts to work. "Say, baby, that nigga down there seems to have plenty of that green shit. He might not talk so loud if someone removes some of it." He looked at his partner to see if they were thinking the same way.
"Daddy cool,"
she said to the lightest one.
"You and little bro had better stay clear of that nigga. That's King Cobra down there. And since he's a small nigga, he carries a great big pistol."
"King Cobra?" little bro said coldly. "Who the fuck is a fucking King Cobra?" Daddy Cool laughed loudly, but kept his voice down. If the man was really dangerous and any nigga with a gun was dangerous, it was best the man didn't know they were discussing him.
"His name is King David, honey,"
Jasper explained quickly.
"Don't too many people call him King Cobra to his face. He don't like to be called a snake, but he sure the fuck is one."
Before they could tie her up with questions, she added,
"Him and Moon got something up, so that might give you an idea of whose ballpark you might end up playing in if you get involved with him."
She left them then, knowing that they would think about what she had just said. Mentioning Moon was the quickest way to stop them from plying her with questions, even though they now knew that King David carried a gun that hadn't stopped them from thinking about ways to knock him off. The mention of Moon's name, however, would take all the desire out of thinking about ripping him off. Jasper moved on up the bar, filling drinks without inquiring about what kind they wanted. Whatever was sitting in front of them was what they got. To an inquiry about who sent the drink, she would just nod in King David's direction. Everybody knew who was buying, but some of the lone women wanted to know his name. After receiving her new drink, Lady Bird, an old customer of the bar who hustled the customers, picked up her drink and stared down the bar in King David's direction. Lady Bird had been working the streets of New York for over 20 years. She had started when she was 14 and had picked up the nickname Lady because she walked so daintily. Over the years, she had become fleshy to the point of chubbiness, and her face, though noticeably young under the brazen whore makeup, appeared yellow and aged.
"Hi, honey,"
Lady Bird chirped in a high voice. The reason they called her Bird was very evident when she spoke. Her voice was high to the point of being shrill, sometimes grating the nerves and becoming tiresome. When King David was hustling, he would have loved to be approached by a woman like Lady Bird. He'd end up getting her money if he had to take it at the point of his knife. But now, since he had all the money he needed for a while, he resented a woman like her trying to hustle him. He twisted around on his bar stool and stared at her as if something dirty had slithered from under the bar. It didn't take anything but a look, and Lady Bird knew she had made a mistake.
"Excuse me, honey,"
she said quickly, running off to the ladies' room. She stopped at the jukebox and punched 3 records for a quarter. When the soft jazz from the jukebox flooded the room, King David relaxed. He dreamed of the future. With his bankroll, he could start backing his own numbers, get a few runners to pick up for him, pay quickly, and just make sure the runner delivered the hit money and his name would begin to ring. People talked about the number man, who always paid as soon as the figures were right. King glanced out the windows, which were heavily covered with posters of Miles Davis, Coltrane, and Mose. It was evening. How different the time was from that back in Los Angeles, he couldn't tell. The highway had made time irrelevant. Staying at motels whenever he felt like it, stopping over in Atlanta, Georgia, and visiting the beautiful club James Brown had built. It had been a good trip. Now he was back, wondering why. He had hesitated in the South, the land drawing him to it, build a cabin and go back to the land. But he had fought the urge, remembering the many evenings in the cabin in Arizona, the lonely nights when he was a boy. The nearest people were the Indians on the reservation. The loneliness was something he never returned to. This was his world, the dimly lit bars, the wheeling and dealing, where a fortune could be made overnight. Tax-free money, the kind the government could never get. 3 young girls entered, all of them wearing pants outfits. King David looked away. He was sick of seeing women in pants. It took something away from them. A woman in pants seldom drew his attention unless she was of exceptional beauty. He glanced at his watch. It was time he went out and waited on the pickup. It wouldn't be long. Not the way Moon loved money. Shit, King reflected. It was Moon's greed that had cost him the $500 in the first place. King smiled as he remembered. It had only cost him $25 to set it up. The first time he spent his own $200 giving it to Big for the piece of heroin he bought. But the catch to it had been the white boy King had hired. He gave the white junkie a fix out of it, then sold the rest of the dope. But Moon had been afraid to do business with the white boy. He wanted the business so that only transactions had to go through King David, who was fronting for himself, keeping the dope and selling it. Then, when he planned to leave, he went to Moon and picked up $500 worth of dope, supposed to be going to the white boy, who would then give the money to King David to pass on to Moon. Moon was afraid to accept money from a peckerwood. That dope was what set King David up in Los Angeles. China White, they called it, when they had first seen the stuff from New York City. "Hey, baby!" King David yelled out to Jasper. "Come on, run down my tab, honey. I got big business to take care of." Jasper came down the bar with her pad in her hand, tearing off a sheet before she reached him.
"There you go, big spender. $26.
She flashed her best smile at him. You could never tell. Niggas like King David went to the top. He reminded her of a rat, sneaky, constantly plotting, trusting no human being. King David dropped $30 on the bar. "Keep the tip and buy yourself a dick, bitch," he said coldly as he turned his back on her. Laughter from the people along the bar drowned out her reply. King walked briskly toward the door. He didn't want to really get her too mad since he wasn't carrying his gun anymore. California had taught him enough about that unwanted police trouble. There was also the fact that New York gave you 5 flat years for possession. So if the crazy bitch got mad enough, he had to do some fast cutting because he knew she had a razor. If the barmaid's eyes could shoot darts, he'd have been stabbed to death before he reached the door. She was wishing him all the bad luck in the world. The night was filled with a chilling breeze. King David put his head down and walked across the street swiftly. He opened the door on the white Eldorado and got in. The car was his castle, the first one he'd ever owned. Still feeling the chill, he turned on the motor and pushed the heater up to 80. Next, he played his favorite tape, Sarah Vaughan singing "Over the Rainbow." 10 minutes hadn't passed when a black Ford pulled up and parked behind his caddy. 2 men got out and quickly approached the car. Seeing them coming, King David let his window down. Rocky and Alvin, Moon's 2 lieutenants, both approached on the driver's side. "What is it, brother?" Ken said loudly as the man came near. He fingered the magnum under the armrest and felt assured. Since he didn't know either of the men, he'd have to wait until they committed themselves. "King David?" It wasn't a question. It was just a way of letting the king know they knew him. Alvin, who spoke his name, continued. "Moon says to tell you that it will be a hell of a lot better if you go uptown, away from him. You know, It ain't just big enough for 2 dogs, so don't get bit. As the men spoke, King David didn't notice a green Chevy pull up and a young black girl get out. She stood beside the other car for a moment, then started walking toward them. King David removed an envelope from his pocket and held it out to the men. "I hear Moon expects something. You boys wouldn't happen to know how much it was?" David asked, holding the money out of reach. "Let's not play games this late in the day, King. We came for $1,000, cash money," Rocky stated, reaching for the envelope. King gave it to him, glad to be rid of it and them. "I guess that ends our little business, don't it?" Neither man bothered to answer, nor to take the time to count the money. Rocky glanced into the envelope to make sure it was money. The small stack contained all $100 bills. As King David started up his motor, he noticed a young attractive girl in a Mini. The short skirt aroused him. Being a leg man, he was interested. She was tall and lean, with well-shaped bow legs. From what he could see, she seemed to be light brown. Alvin went back and started up the Ford. He glanced over at Rocky. "It looks like Mike ain't bullshitting. That's his young sister out there. Ain't never known him to bring her into anything." Rocky shook his head in agreement. "Yeah, I wouldn't trade places with King David for all the tea in China." He glanced out the window as they drove past. They saw her motion for King to join her. King shook his head and waved to her to come over. "Come here, Tender Mama. It's chilly out there." He spoke loudly as he let the window down on the passenger side. Before he finished speaking, she had started for the car. She walked with a proud step, knowing well that she was in her prime.
"What is it, honey?"
she asked when she reached the car. She bent down and smiled, flashing well-kept, bright teeth. She was younger than he had first thought. Now his interest was really aroused. He didn't believe she was over 15. What a beautiful mare this would be for a coming home present. Her skin looked so cool and golden brown that he wanted to reach out and touch it. As he stared at her, he mentally undressed her. Her young breasts would be straight out without any sag, firm and tender, something to stimulate a man like him. "Come on and sit down, honey. It's kind of chilly out there." He hit the door lock near his left hand. She smiled at him, not bothering to open the door.
"Let your windows down, sweetie,"
she said in a light voice. A frown crossed King David's face, but he decided to play it her way until he could talk her into the car. "What's wrong, sweet thing? You ain't changed your mind about a little bit of fun, have you?"
"What you talking about, man? I ain't said nothing, just looking, that's all."
Her voice had a husky ring to it, revealing what was in store when she became mature. Country girl, thought King David. All she wanted was to be begged. Then she'd get in and end up bucking like a mule. King David thought he knew the type. Might be the first time she ever rode in a Cadillac. The longer he stared at the girl, though, the more he felt like he knew her. The face. There was something about it that he remembered. But it couldn't be. The kid wouldn't have been over 10 when he left. And though he liked them young, he didn't mess with kids that young. It had to be a well-developed young girl to excite him. The way she had of leaning back on her heels, her skirt tight against her legs, her head cocked to the side arrogantly. A light started blinking in his mind, and he knew he had his finger on it in a minute. The voice reached him through the open window on the driver's side, which he hadn't bothered to roll back up, and took him completely by surprise. King David flinched. He prided himself on never losing his cool, but for a moment, he did. Twisting his neck around, King David saw the two of them, both holding pistols. Quickly, he tried to place them, but they were too young. Young jack-up artists, he thought instantly. If he didn't give them any trouble, they'd take the few hundred he had and leave happy. "You must not be able to hear so good, punk! I said out!" It was the same voice, only this time King David really understood the words. He hated parting with his magnum, but it would have been useless to try removing the large pistol. He knew without a doubt that these men would kill him because if he got the chance, he'd kill them. As he opened the door, He glanced back at the young girl, but she was gone. It had been so fleeting it might as well have been a dream. To have been set up by a 15-year-old girl. Her bitter smile curved at King David's lips. What a wonderful, black-hearted bitch she would be for whoever controlled her. "Move it, nigga!" the black man growled. For the first time, King David took a good look at his jack-up artists. The eyes of the blacker one were dead, and he didn't like the cold, fish-eyed nigger. But what he saw in the younger black's eyes shocked him. They were enraged. The boy's whole face showed that he was fighting for control. Tears were in the corners of his eyes. Whatever the reason, King David knew it would have gone better if he had tried to draw the heavy gun. Even as the door closed, his agile mind told him that this was much more than a heist. For some reason, these men wanted to kill him. He had to find out why and talk. If they'd listen, he had a chance. Talking was his whole game. If somebody would listen, he had a story to tell. Mike grabbed King David and shoved him toward the sidewalk. The little man was walking too slow. Mike came up on the sidewalk beside him, and instead of the gun, he now held a long switchblade. People entering the bar noticed a small commotion, and now others looked out the window. "Well, I'll be damned, partner. We done collected an audience by accident," Blue told Mike quietly. "Don't look like you have much time, but if the nigga leaves here without knowing why, then the joke's on him." Suddenly, the man's face seemed to come alive, and with it, the dead fish eyes. They embodied something unspeakably evil and vile. "Why, man? Why?" King David screamed at the top of his voice as he stepped back and reached wildly for his knife. They meant to kill him, and he didn't want to die for no reason at all. "Take my money, man! Here!" He knew they didn't want his money, but he needed a second, and he got it. Mike hesitated for a minute. He didn't want to kill him without letting him know why. He had lived this moment way too many times. He wanted to see the little rat beg, then remind him of the young kid he had hit with the bottle. Because of the moment's hesitation on Mike's part, Blue had to step around Mike. He knew the killing had to go off now. Too many people were taking interest in what was going on. Blue wished now that he had kept his gun in his hand. The knives had been Mike's idea, even though they used guns to force King out of the car. With the long stiletto held firmly in his right hand, Blue moved around Mike quickly. King David had two choices when he went to his coat pocket: to bring out his wallet or the long, keen-bladed knife he kept next to his wallet. The money wouldn't do any good. He knew these men were going to cut them up a nigger. He couldn't understand why, but he thanked heaven that the boy had hesitated when he mentioned his money. He got his second, and at least he'd have a chance to cut one of them. If the boy didn't move quick enough, he might get them both. When Blue came in under King David's guard, he stabbed upward, starting from the stomach. Suddenly, a pain exploded in the base of his neck. King David screamed shrilly from the pain. He jerked back suddenly, breaking the blade off while part of it was still embedded in him. The action brought Mike out of his black thoughts, and he moved with swiftness. He struck and struck and struck again. All the stab wounds were to the stomach. King David screamed from the pain, and the more he twisted away, the more the boy stalked him. He screamed from sheer pain now, and as he fell, Mike bent down and plunged the knife into his prone figure. Blood ran over Mike's hands, and his clothes were covered with it. He struck King David one more time, high in the chest. "What the hell is going on?" It was a white voice, and that rang a bell instantly. Mike glanced up and saw a wildly bearded white man running toward them. He looked big enough to give them plenty of it, too. Mike turned and ran toward the waiting auto that was backing toward them down the street. Even as he ran toward the car, he saw Blue stumbling from one car to the other, holding himself up. He was hurt. Mike quickly caught up with him and helped him the rest of the way to the car.
God damn!
Mike's younger sister Edna yelled at them.
Why didn't you just shoot the bastard and get it over with? Now look at the headache we got!
Just shut the fuck up and drive. We got no motherfucking problems, Mike ordered sharply. Paul Pawlowski leaned down over the neatly dressed black man. The man gasped. Mister, whoever you are, please, don't let me die here on these streets. Please, mister, he begged. I don't want to die alone in the gutter. Paul pulled the man's shirt back and knew at once that he couldn't live. Blood was bubbling out of the man's open chest. There was a gash from his lower stomach up to his chest. Paul could see the man's intestines seething beneath the shredded skin. The dying black man turned his head to the side and vomited, oozing blood and a sickening brown bile. Paul held his own stomach firm. He gently reached down and lifted the gored man up in his long arms and carried him up the steps toward his room. Edna glanced at Blue's eye. She could see the metal blade protruding from it. Blood ran freely from the hole in the man's socket. It was a horrible wound, and she twisted away from the sight.
Are you mad?
Her voice began to rise. A chilling terror invaded her. The thought of Blue lying beside her bleeding hurt so bad that he needed immediate help from a doctor frightened her.
We ain't got no problems, do we?
She screamed the words back at Mike. In her blind, growing rage at her brother, Edna momentarily lost control of the steering wheel and sideswiped the parked car. God damn it! Mike roared. Drive the car and let me worry about Blue. The order was sharp, harsh enough to make her concentrate on her driving. Mike glanced back over his shoulder at the rear window. God damn it! The curse word roared over and over and over again in his mind. He had gotten the dirty motherfucker after all the waiting. His life was complete. The only dream he had ever had was of killing King David. Now it was over. His mind refused to face the reality of their next step. We have reached the end of this episode of Ralph Reads. I would like, or rather love, to thank my queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. You can contact me on Facebook, Ralph Anthony Garcia, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope at rgmc2407, or email me, rgmc2407@gmail.com, where, if you would like to leave a small donation, please use the Zelle app or paypal.me/rgmc2407, or the Cash App. My cash tag is rgmc2407. You can also find me on my other channel, RGMC, Ralph Garcia, Master of Ceremonies, and right here on the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you, and I love you like cooked food. I will see you fellow sexy people on the continuation of this Donald Goines miniseries on Ralph Reads. Until next time.